why you make the distinction? Doing confuse us. Well, I mean, why is that being easy on us?
I made that distinction because I don't think that non-material actors don't have agency, but it is a highly contentious issue. And in terms of anti-history, I wasn't necessarily sure that we had to engage with that, so I just kind of left it. But that's it, really. Yeah.
Next question? Yes, sir. Yeah.
Sorry, just just to follow up on that, the issue of agency. Is it possible, and here off the cuff answer is perfectly acceptable, is it possible that agency arises as the function of the process of enrollment? And as you noted, enrollment is actually bi-directional. I can choose very carefully. I can read a book, and the content can affect me, giving rise to my decisions, which lead to agency on my part as an actor. On the other hand, I can also choose specific forms of the content myself, which again potentially leads to a different decision, to a different agential content. So agency may be a function of the relation between the two actors as opposed to resides solely in a human versus a non-human actor. Does that make sense?
Interesting.
I mean, if you put a table in the middle of the room, the table doesn't choose to make me go around it. But if the table wasn't there, I may choose to do something else.
Yeah, I think that's how most academic theorists, and anyone in the room can correct me if I'm wrong, but academic theorists focus on relations as opposed to specific, like, object, material, or human. And so possibly agency can be understood relationally as well.
In the back there, yes, ma'am?
I wanted to ask how far you think your approach taken in for historical work compares to what's happening in history, philosophy of history and theory of history.
Which philosophy of history, or which
Albert mentioned at the beginning that they relate to humanities and philosophy of history and theory of history.
yeah.
I wonder how far you think that this particular approach contributes to that other body of knowledge.
Okay, well, there are many different types of historiographies that have been developed. Marxists have developed approaches to historiography. They've been accused of being reductionist. Positivists have contributed to historiography in some ways as well. In terms of, I guess, how we would differentiate ourselves, I think probably we can find the need to differentiate ourselves the most from cultural theorists, because I think that in terms of Marxist historiography or positivist historiography, or the differences are probably evident. In terms of cultural theory, I talked a little bit about the work of Michel Foucault, and I talked a little bit about the work of Bruno Latour, and I think I illustrated the differences there. So Foucault's interested in the constitution of the historical subject, and assumes that the historical subject exists through a series of discursive relations, or discourses operate through the subject. Bruno Latour looks at the constitution of the social. We're interested in the social past, and we assume that actors are deeply historical beings. Derrida, for example, argues for a more deconstructionist approach. We differ in that regard because we're interested, we don't assume that the past is pre-constituted. We don't assume that the social is pre-constituted. Derrida almost makes that assumption because it's only by virtue of the social being constituted that he can deconstruct it. We can't deconstruct something that hasn't been already constructed. So our emphasis is really on reassembling, because we assume that the past is an absent present. It doesn't exist in a realist ontological sense. And so all we can do is follow actors and reassemble, but we're never trying to represent, which is what the positivists probably would want, an accurate representation of what happened. And we deny that that's ever possible.
What about versus genealogy, which is another historical approach?
Genealogy?
Yeah. I think that genealogy, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think maybe in how we differ from that is we're really looking at, and I hate to use the word micro, but we're really looking at sites of translation and the relational, I guess bad word, but relational relationships that emerges between different actors. Perhaps and that maybe genealogy might be looking at maybe a higher, more macro. We're really looking at, Albert has a version of history and I have a version of history, and I talk to Albert, and my understanding is altered by virtue of engaging with this actor. We're looking at how dominant forms of knowing emerge out of this.
Sir, in the back there, yeah. Yeah.
No, I really like this. But I guess, do you have a research program? Where might you apply it? Where do you see it applying?
Well, we have there's a couple of ideas. One of the things that we have done is we've looked at Pan American Airways, and we've looked at Pan American Airways had about maybe 3 published, which we call popular histories, and they're histories that were written by, one of the histories that we looked at more specifically was written by a writer who writes fiction as well. His name is Robert Daly. He writes this history. What we did using ANTI-History, if I can say that, is we looked at all of the sociopolitics involved in the construction of that history. Robert Daly or others started to write that history in 1957. The book gets published in 1976. There's a long period of time there where no one can agree on a version of the past, except when you read the Robert Daly book, it's a punctuated actor because it conceals all of the socio-political relations of actors from which this book emerged. They're completely hidden from view. This acts as the de facto history of Pan Am, except it's one version of the past. So that would be one way, but we've also thought about looking at the Cold War in a Cold War context, using anti-history to look at management theorizing in a Cold War context.
And you take management knowledge, for example. We've done a lot of research on textbooks, and the sort of social networks that come to compose that, and how that becomes management knowledge.
You can have managerial fads and fashions in the revolution over time.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
look at whose version of that past, or whose version of that knowledge becomes privileged. And really, there's not one actor. It's a bunch of networks through which these specific versions, certain versions of management history become privileged, but they come to act as actors.
And if you want a sort of example of the sort of actor, non-actor, think of the many professors in the classroom who, for time or whatever constraints, just grab the textbook and they reproduce that sort of embedded knowledge, and the book's doing way more than them often enough.
They're enrolled by the actor.
The book itself is often a much more powerful actor in the classroom than even some of our colleagues. Sad to say, but it's true.
All right, now entertain questions for any of these
Okay,
papers
good.
that have been discussed. You can keep questioning Albert and Gabby if you want, but we'll take, open it up for all questions. Yes, sir, you've been eager to, go ahead.
Next level is very interesting. I'm trying to do something similar. Try to combine ANC with post-colonial theory.
Yeah.
And it's very reflective. My question is related not on the applicability of this in terms of looking at the past. And if I can use a metaphor from ANC itself, the idea of the spokesperson. So you really know where you're trying to go past the spokesperson, like in the history book, for example, to talk to people behind it, to go beyond the head of the union, to go and talk to the actual employees. But there's a practicality with having spokespeople, that it's too complex to go and talk to everybody else. And even when you do that, you're going to choose some people and not everybody else. So there's a cut-line line where you will ignore some and focus on others. Same thing will happen in the past. Now, how do you deal with this whole complexity that you end up?
We'd like you to write down the answer and give it to us, because, it's following the actors is easier said than done. And like anything, there are cut-offs. And often enough, like when we were exploring Pan American Airways, we relied on, because it's a dead airline, died in 91, we were relying on archival material. And that itself is already problematic. We'll leave that for now. And we could only follow the actors that were collected in the archive, so to speak. And so that's something that you are transparent about, and you surface and you talk about the limitations. But I think that your task, if you like, is to probe as far as possible to find the various actors that have constituted particular point of knowledge. Yeah? But, what else can you do? I don't know. It's a debate we had, in fact, just before coming here.